Okay, let's pick up on water traps and placer gold. This is Prospector Jess, sourdoughminer.com, huntingforgold.com. Check it out down below and check out my YouTube channel. Subscribe. That's Prospector Jess channel on YouTube. We rebroadcast a lot of this stuff on there. A little bit behind on the rebroadcast process because I'm busy doing this other stuff trying to get things out. So it's a case of too many hats. Hey, how's everybody doing tonight? Are we finding gold? Are we having fun? How may I help you find more gold? That's what we're about at huntingforgold.com and Sourdough Miner. Check out the blog posts and see what you can find in the way of stuff that would help you. Tonight we're going to talk about water traps and a specific concept behind water traps. You've probably heard me talk about water traps and essentially gold traps and how that works with water. What I'm going to talk about tonight is a little bit different angle on the same theme, and that is that we talked about turbulence last night and how that kind of works to make water kind of go crazy. I didn't want to lose you. I think I lost about 45, well, I probably lost 95% of you. And sorry about that, but that's the way that goes. The idea here is that turbulence and the laminar flow kind of all play a role and vary with the amount of flow, so it varies with seasons, to drive gold into certain places. Now, a natural place for us to talk about is a gold trap. So I thought I'd give you an example by showing you the opening scene here, which is a gold trap right here. And don't forget, we still have the sourdoughminer.com systematic prospecting offer available. Go check it out at that link below, sourdoughminer.com/sys. That's the sponsor for the week. And that's our special sale for July. So don't forget to take a look before it goes away. So, you know, and a lot of what it teaches, quick aside, a lot of what's in there is this approach to looking at gold prospecting from a more methodical process so that you can get more reliable results and larger results in terms of what you find. I've had a number of people contact me and say, you know, they've tried and they've never found. I've had a couple people in the last few months contact me and say, you know what, I used to do and try and not find, but now I'm using this thing you're teaching, and you know what, it works. That's the idea. And they're saying, you know what, now I can make sense out of what I wasn't doing right, even though all those other clubs I belong to told me how to, you know, use the tools and how to get started, but they didn't teach me what I was looking for. And that's the key thing I'm after, is to show you what you're looking for and how to think about that and why it works the way it does scientifically, so that you can approach it in a more systematic manner. That's the objective. So let's take a look. This is a situation right here where we have water flow, and let me hang on one second here. So we have water flow, and as we talked about last night, let me divide this flow into two regimes. One is our normal flow, and one is turbulence. So you can see this kind of pattern right through here, where all of a sudden we shift into this nice and stable laminar flow. Things are kind of moving through. You can even see little ripples on the top as the water flow kind of curls around. Laminar doesn't mean it's straight. It just means that it's nice and linear behavior. And then all of a sudden, right in here, you can kind of see it do this loop-de-loop thing, and pretty soon it's just making its noise heard, and that's all chaotic flow. This is what we call turbulent flow. Now, and bubbles get introduced, and they create a whole nother set of turbulence. So the idea is we've got two sets of flow, you know, laminar and turbulent, the L and the T, okay? Now, what does that have to do with what we're looking at here? Well, because remember I told you want to kind of look, and it was asked, I think, Charles, you asked me last night about where would I look around this, you know, how far back behind the turbulence do I look, etc. It's not so much how far back you look as how you look at turbulence and how you look at laminar flow. In particular, in this picture, part of why I picked this particular one is this area over in here. Notice the collection of aggregates and cobbles, and it goes clear down into this flow and kind of disappears right about there. In fact, if you looked, you know, got under this freezing cold water with your good old wetsuit and your mask, you'd probably see down in this area, it would be pretty well scoured clean. Now, why might that be? Well, because in high flow, there's not just a little bit of turbulence here, there's a lot of turbulence. even back in here, there's a lot of turbulence. So this is oftentimes a case where this settled toward the end of the high flow, but still it settled. And I do see in here some larger cobbles. You can see some of them right down in here and that kind of thing. So that tends to say this thing is nice and layered, okay? And that gives me an idea that there may be a good position right here that's catching gold. May not be, but there could be. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't any gold down in here, but what it does mean is what you're going to most likely find down in here is larger gold, and it's going to be buried in the cracks and nooks and crannies or behind boulders like this one right here, such that it's hiding from the flow, because anything else is going to get scoured, especially when this thing goes into full flow. Because remember, in full flow, let me change colors again. So in full flow, this thing is probably flowing up to this level up here. Kind of get the idea. You can see the scouring of this. You know, see this whole area here has been scoured clean. So it's going to be at least that high. That means all of this is underwater from here to here. And then notice this is all scoured clean over here. Okay? That tends to say no gold on that surface. But there are cracks and things like that. You can see some right along in here. There are potential cracks going down into this material. You can see some right over in here. And then there's this boulder arrangement and more cracks over in here. All of that tends to say, well, you know, even though there's only gravel and cobbles over here, there's still enough information to tell me this is a good looking prospect for me to start with. And so I tend to look at this kind of thing and say, let me start digging into this area right in here. And this will become my little mining sample zone number 1. And we'll work that. Now that's one case, and that's the pretty obvious case of a gold trap or a place where, you know, placer gold might settle out in turbulent flow. But let me show you what we were going to talk about earlier. And that is what happens if the flow isn't, you know, quite that simple. Well, there is another kind of placer trap that gets forgotten way too often. And ever since people have stopped dredging and high banking, because remember, dredging and high banking by and large benefit from being near water like this, okay? And so what happens is when they benefit from that water flow, you tend to stick near them, you know, like the length of your intake tube away plus a little bit of pressure tube, okay? So you're going to be really close to this thing, and you're going to have your little pump right here, and then you're going to go up here a little bit, maybe 25 feet, and that's going to be your base camp, and you're going to shovel in stuff from wherever that is. But let me show you another concept that you should think about, and that is you should be letting the gold drive you, not the water drive you. And so what happens is if you see a prospect that has this kind of, you know, picture, do you ever see one of these that looks like that but isn't near water? Let me show you one. Okay, this is rowdy. Let me change colors here. So this is Rowdy right here. Rowdy the gold hound. Okay, he hangs with us whenever we go hunting. And you see the cobble sizes here. These are pretty giant sized cobbles. And then there's a whole bunch of melange of smaller stuff that we were pulling out and basically running through our high banker. Now, why am I showing you this? Because normally when you see a stream like this one down below where it's kind of meandering and, you know, you're going to go inside edge of the curve. Remember that? Inside edge of the curve and da-da-da, okay? You're going to follow the normal gold path, which is going to kind of flow across this zone through here and then zigzag over to the other side. So what I'm getting at is that's kind of what you typically do, and you want to think about that. But that isn't the only place you should be looking. What you should be looking is, what about uphill away from the water? Like where the stream flowed in ancient times or in super high flow, and it was just unusually different from what you see in the flow you see before you. That's the case of this whole zone here. And that is, this thing is up and away from the flow, but had these rounded cobbles, and they're black, and it had, you know, nice darkened quartz material like tertiary cobbles in it with, you know, the potential for gold to be broken out of them. This is in a zone that has a fair amount of alluvial gold, some good sized nuggets, etc. So you want to bore a sample hole up and away from that stuff. And so what happened was people started, sampling because they really couldn't do a whole lot with dredges anymore. They started getting their buckets out and their wheelbarrows and sampling up away from the shoreline. And lo and behold, they started finding some serious gold. And the reason is because the floods have recharged those zones, but they've been heavily reworked by, newer prospectors for the last few decades. And that meant that the stuff that was normally down in the creek, other than in cracks and crevices, was depleted. But that doesn't mean the stuff up away from the creek, up this way, is depleted. In fact, quite the converse. It meant that people were ignoring what, because they found gold below, they weren't thinking, well, there might be gold on up above. Always remember that can be a gold trap. And so what you're looking for is what kinds of things would trap out gold, and in that environment, are there boulders and cobbles? There's a great big boulder right over in this area here. You can't see it, but it's a giant thing, more or less a piece of the bedrock that came up. Down under here is about 10 feet of overburden. We didn't think so because we saw the bedrock here, right? So we said there can't be overburden. Nope, there can be. And that means there's a big trap behind there. See the point? So now you got to go to bedrock, and you got to go bedrock and down toward that big huge boulder or the bedrock piece, because behind that flow deep down in is where that gold is going to concentrate out. Does that make sense? So that's what I thought. I'd just give you a tip tonight, make it real quick. Just a quick one. Don't always focus on the water flow zone. There tends to be this emphasis that everything that's gold has to be found in the center of the creek. Couldn't be further from the truth. And the old timers knew that, so they spent a fair amount of time on the hillsides, looking up and down, checking those locations. Up here and up here, okay? And so that's the idea, is kind of don't be afraid of getting away from the creek to look for your gold. You may have to carry it, but you can certainly sample, take a bucket or two, a Homer bucket, or if you can't carry it, try using some kind of a device, whether it's a hand cart, or they make wheelbarrows that have big bicycle wheels and that kind of stuff to get over rocky terrains. But anyway, the idea is get the material from a further position than you typically see for two reasons. One, it's likely to be that other people thought the same thing you're thinking, which is that's too hard and too far. And two, it's also likely to be in a trap that nobody's really thought about. You haven't really considered the possibility that something back up here would contain that much gold, but it does. And so that's the idea for tonight. Just check out those further and more distant and unusual traps. Am I there yet? Yes. Okay, so let me pause. I'm just reading. I'm reading your comments, by the way. So let me back up and say, so Charles is here. Hey, Charles. He's up there in earthquake country, earthquake 2. See, MK Gray, I need to get back out west. Yes, you do, or down southeast, one of the two, and go find that gold. Bob Sheasley's here from North Carolina. He can help you out. He's out looking for gold right now. Victor is looking in Australia. What is a high banker? What is a high banker? Is it a high water mark? Okay, a high banker is a device. Boy, a high banker is a device. I had it on the picture from, check one of the videos like last night, and look in the intervening videos, you'll see me standing by my high banker. It's a big sluice with stands. It has a bucket at the top and a shower that sprays the rocks and minerals as they go in and gets all the mud and clay broken off and settled down, drops into a sluice box and flows down, somewhat like a dredge. In fact, many of them, like the one I have, can be used as a combination of high banker and dredge. Usually a small dredge. Mine's 3-incher, which is a relatively big high banker. But the idea is it has a grizzly to separate the big rocks, and then it has the sluice and all that stuff to let things flow through. And what it can do is make quick processing of stuff that's up and away from the creek. Still is limited by your hoses, and so you have a bit of a problem, and you still have to have a settling pond and all that stuff to follow all the regulations, if it's allowed even. So it's tricky. But the fact is that high banker is pretty useful for an area like this where you're a little bit remotely removed and can't really float a dredge, or you don't have a deep enough spot. Because you can float a dredge in a pool, that's called booming, and then you can run your dredge down toward bedrock there. That's one way to get a sampling site like this running. But again, you still need to have, you know, your hoses running for hundreds of feet, and every foot of hose has an amount of resistance, so it means that more horsepower, bigger lines, etc. Gets kind of difficult to run, and uphill gets very difficult to run because you pump, you know, you lose head or pressure as you go uphill. Okay, 0.4 of a pound per square inch for every foot that you rise. So there's a little bit of factoid for you. So the idea is a high banker is one device similar to a dredge, and think of it as a power sluice. That's another name for it. Let's see. We have Stephen Papuchis from Virginia. Hey, welcome back. He says he's back here again. And David Hellier he's going to move west someday soon. All right. Look forward to seeing you. Just count the cost when it comes to California. I'm giving you a warning because I live here. It didn't used to cost like this. Bob Sheasley says, thanks, Jess. You're welcome, Bob. And Charles says, I will check this weekend. Awesome. And Bob Lanier from Ohio. And then we have Bob who says he wishes he could dig outside the creek where I go panning. Yeah, you know, and that's one of the problems with all the things I'm teaching is that, you know, it's wrapped with a lot of regulation. And so you have to check your local regulations to some degree, or your willingness to lose your gold pan and or, you know, get imprisoned and put into, well, I doubt that, but, you know, you might find yourself slapped with a fine, so you have to be careful. And that's the nature of where we are today, sadly. Back in the day, you know, gold panning and prospecting was something you did, and the worst thing you'd have would be claim jumpers and the anti-claim jumpers with their shotguns. So, okay, there are worse things. worse things in life. Just read Tom Sawyer or not Tom Sawyer, Mark Twain sometime. He's got some pretty tall tales about roughing it. Pretty good stuff. Okay, so that's it for tonight. I just thought I'd touch on water traps in a special way, specifically the trap that's away from the water. You might think of a water trap as only being in the water. It's not. It's wherever water flowed in the past. Remember that. And then don't forget, again, as I said earlier, this thing is still available, so check out sourdoughminer.com/this. And systematic prospecting, that's still going on for the next few days. We're running short, so check it out. And I will catch you then. Good prospecting and good night. See you tomorrow night.